Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome back to what is going to be the first of, I think, three days that we're going to be reading through the Odyssey. Now, we ended off the last episode, or the last video rather, the introduction, going over a couple things. So, an introduction to how to understand the genre of myth, how to understand the story that led up to the Odyssey. And then we began talking about how to understand the reading of the Odyssey and how to understand it through a particular lens of interpretation, or more specifically, how to understand it as a metaphor for the experience of life. Now, I did not actually go over the final question in your introduction questions right here. So the last one, we talked about it. The answer is there, but we didn't actually go through it specifically. So it's asking for number 20, finally explain how the story of the Odyssey could be a representation, metaphor, or symbol for something we all go through. Well, like we said last time, that of course would be it is a metaphor for the journey of life. Now, the important thing, as we're going to see once we begin today's readings, is it's not just a journey of kind of moseying your way through life, or what I usually call like a sandbox experience in life. That's not what we're doing here. We're going through life with a distinct trajectory, with a distinct aim, a goal in mind. Okay, that's kind of what we are looking at this year. And so, if you zoom out, then if you're looking at this story and you're like, okay, it's a clear metaphor for our journey through life, our journey towards a desirable goal, like we talked about, one, right? Not a goal that's like Agamemnon, Achilles, or Paris. It's something that's much more, I think, noble and much more valued, at least by the author and at least by our collective human wisdom. If you're going towards this goal, what are the things, the obstacles that you need to go through in order to get towards it? And what are the obstacles that are going to keep you from getting to it? Those are the things that we're going to be looking at, particularly in this particular reading, the ones we're about to look at here, and then the middle ones as well. So, and if you want to basically look at how Odysseus is struggling to get back home, and if you understand that, yeah, those are the things that he's struggling against, essentially the things that he needs to overcome and the things that he needs to get through in order to achieve this goal that I think the majority of people, I think the ones of us with a well-organized mind at least, want to get to. That's what he needs to go through. Okay, so what we're looking at here in some very deep metaphorical and symbolic sense is just that eternal struggle that we all go through and how we are trying to overcome these universal experiences and these universal road bumps or roadblocks that keep us from getting to this goal. So if you look at the Odyssey through that particular lens, through that, aspect, I think that actually enriches the whole experience as much, much more. You can, and you absolutely should, sit back and enjoy it as just a work of literature and as a really, really good story, because it is. But if you're looking for the fullness of experience of literature and art, I think that's one of the ways that we could really easily start to access that when you start to allow these works to educate you and to guide you and to teach you, because they've been teaching people for thousands of years. So we're going to begin now with the first section of the readings for this unit. And if you look right here, the first readings include book one, a really short passage from book one, just the intro. Book five, so about a two and a half page, 2 page section from book five, and then book nine, which I believe book nine, I think I shortened it. I hope I shortened it. I didn't apparently. That's fine. But we're going to skim through book nine because there's a lot in book nine, but a lot that we also don't really need to read. So we have a snippet from book one, a chunk of book five, and then a bunch from book nine. That's all we're doing for the intro here. Now, as you're reading through, you're obviously, like I said, you notice the whole book is not here, but we're getting these italicized passages from the text that I originally took these from. And these are basically just summarizer passages. They're just telling you what's happening in between the action that we're reading specifically here. Now, one quick note, the two things about that actually. You really do want to make sure that you're reading those in sufficient detail, because they are very necessary for not only our just comprehension of what's happening with the plot, but also your comprehension of the themes as well. There's a lot packed in there. Now, unfortunately, the second point here is that when we are writing our quick writes or our responses to these different readings, we can't use those as textual evidence. Okay, so don't go ahead and quote those passages. You can't quote this stuff. You can only quote the actual text from Homer himself. Okay, now let's jump in. And again, remember the style that we're looking at here. Remember the genre. It's poetry. It's verse. It's meant to be read in that sort of way. That's why it looks as it does here. So you're going to have stanzas, not paragraphs. You're going to have a different sort of structure, not a particularly obvious set of rhyming structure, right? Because the whole sequence of rhyming and having a set meter and all this kind of stuff is a later development in poetry. Right now, when we're looking at Homer's, it's a different sort of pattern and sort of rhythm that he's using here. So, additionally, on top of it, because we are translating him from the ancient Greek text originally. Okay, so it doesn't really rhyme in English all that well. Now, how does the story begin? Let's take a look. Sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending, the wanderer, harried for years on end, after he plundered the stronghold on the proud height of Troy. He saw the townlands and learned the minds of many distant men. And weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea, while he fought only to save his life, to bring his shipmates home. But not by will nor valor could he save them, for their own recklessness destroyed them all. Children and fools, they killed and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios, the sun, and he who moves all day through the heaven took from their eyes the dawn of their return. Of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time. Lift the great song again. Okay, so a couple things here. Number one, as the close reading questions are asking you, what feature of epic poetry do we see out here on display? Well, the easiest one, guys, is that invocation, right? So if you go back to the notes, you look at the 3 or 4 identifying stylistic features of epic poetry. First one that we see here is the invocation to the muse, right? So because it's ancient Greek culture, we're looking at muses, not the Holy Spirit and stuff like this. We're looking for the goddesses of inspiration. Perfect. For number 2, how is Odysseus characterized as a hero here? Well, a couple different ways. Number 1, we have this passage saying that he is skilled in all ways of contending. So right off the bat, that should remind you of the values that we looked at in the ancient Greek culture before. So we see that he is a well-rounded person, right? He is someone who is not just skilled in terms of his, military and martial prowess, but in every way of contending and any sort of challenge he would come up against. He's skilled in it, right? He has got an incredibly well-rounded skill set. Okay, now number 2, we could see that he is famous. He's well known. He is seen as someone who all the Greeks know. And why is this, of course? Because remember back to our summary of the Trojan War, he is the one who is accredited with really coming up with, not really essentially being the one who took Troy down, but is certainly coming up with the plan that would eventually do it, right? So he is accredited really, really highly in that regard. And the third one, I think, which is something we need to take a fair amount of notice of. It says, he saw the townlands and learned the minds of many distant men. So this describes an aspect of the ancient world that we often overlook, which is the need and the desire and the value of being both experienced and worldly, right? We like someone who travels around, who experiences a lot of the world and then comes back to their own home with that experience. This is a positive thing in the ancient world. So he's got that. For number 4, so there's about 5 pieces of characterization here. So the 4th one would be that he's able to endure, as it says, a lot of bitter nights and days. He weathered them, right? And that, of course, means that he's able to put up with them. He's able to endure them. So this shows that he has a lot of not just what would you say, resilience, but a lot of additional strength, right? He's able to, yes, be resilient and weather these things, but I think that actually makes him, as we're going to see, a lot stronger and a lot more resilient and a lot more, what would you say, strong or anti-fragile, as we say nowadays, right? Truly a strong and an increasingly strong person. Now for number 5, and the fifth one, the fifth and maybe last piece of characterization here. It says that he fights only to save his life and to bring his shipmates home. This is obviously showing that Odysseus, who again, remember, is a not just a martial leader, but is an actual governing leader. He's the king of Ithaca. He actually has dominion over these men that he's caring for. He does care for them, and these people are what are essentially his social inferiors, his underlings. So this is a theme that we're going to see right up until the very end of the Odyssey. Odysseus treats his men, the people beneath him, right, the people who are quote unquote lesser than him, at least in the eyes of society at this time. He treats them with respect and with care. He fights very fervently to try to bring them home. So he shows this level of compassion for his soldiers, for his men, for his fellow Ithacaans, to want to get them home. Right? It's a fantastic quality that we see exemplified in Homer's writing here. Now, the last one, of course, is his longing for home, right? He only longs for home. He wants to be home. Now, it's a euphemism, right? Or not a euphemism, but it's a condensed term, home. What does it mean here? Does it mean he just wants to be in Ithaca? No, no, no. This means that he wants to be with Penelope and Telemachus, his son. That's what he desires. He wants to be with them. He wants to be in a stable home with them, and he wants to be on Ithaca and able to live out that fullness of life with his family in his kingdom. That's his chiefest desire. Okay, keep that in mind for our last discussion about book one. So keep that on the side. For number three, it's asking, what has gone wrong with Odysseus' journey and why? Well, it says that his men were reckless and foolish, right? They were childish. They were not able to what? Resist. We're not going to get the whole story here, but Homer is kind of dropping the hint that they were tempted and feasted on the cattle of Helios, who's a Titan. He's the Titan of the sun. And as a result, they died. That they were punished for this in some way, shape, or form. We'll find out how when we get there. So that's bad. And he was obviously not able to get home as a result of this or even before this. So it's been a really rough road. Like we said, we know that it's been 10 years since he left Troy and has been trying to get back to Ithaca. Okay. Now, important point here. Why was it that as it says, the light or the dawn of their eyes was taken away from them, his men? They did what? They disrespected who? They disrespected the gods, right? Not just Lord Helios, not just the Titan of the sun, but through him, all of the other mandates of the gods, all of the sacredness that is around his cattle, okay? Now, once we get there, we're going to see what is the big deal? What is the big deal with the cows? Why do we pick a cow? Why, why can't we just let it go? You'll see. Okay, you'll see why. But this is, as you're going to find out, the last straw in their series of many, many mistakes. Okay. Now, that's the opening passage. And the following passage is almost as important, the summary passage here. Let's take a look at it. It says, the story of Odysseus begins with the goddess Athena appealing to Zeus to help Odysseus, who has been wandering for 10 years on the seas, to find his way home to his family on Ithaca. While Odysseus has been gone, his son, Telemachus, has grown to manhood, and his wife, Penelope, has been besieged by suitors wishing to marry her and gain Odysseus's wealth. The suitors have taken up residence in her home and are constantly feasting on the family's cattle, sheep, and goats. They dishonor Odysseus and his family. Taking Athena's advice, Telemachus travels to Pylos for word of his father's whereabouts. Meanwhile, on Ithaca, the suitors plot to kill Telemachus when he returns. Okay, so there are, I think, probably about 6 major points that you should walk away with after looking at that chunk of information there. The first one is that this relationship between Athena and Odysseus, why is it that Athena is appealing to Zeus and sort of helping him out here? It's because Athena has an affinity, as we talked about last time, for Greeks and people in general who are using all of their intellectual capacities in their endeavors, in their battles, or in their struggles in life. She likes this. She likes strategic, clever warfare. She is the true, like we talked about, the true goddess of war, the true god of war. It's not Ares. Ares is not the god of war. He's the god of violence and rage and blood and guts. He's about that kind of warfare, right? Whereas she is usually the one invoked if you're looking for true victory in warfare. So she acts here as Odysseus's patron. Okay. Now we're going to see her adopt this role further and further through really more in the end of the Odyssey. So keep Athena in the back of your mind. Just know that she's there. For number two, the second major point here, Odysseus is fiercely loyal and determined to find his family. This is going to be very clear in the next book we read, number 5, where we see that he is presented with innumerable temptations, essentially, to not go on this journey, to not seek this out, to simply leave Penelope and Telemachus and Ithaca and just pursue whatever he may want as an ulterior or an ulterior desire. And he doesn't do it. All right. He continuously for 10 years, or 20 if really in full, he maintains this kind of laser focus on home. However, and this is the third major point here, Telemachus, his son, who is now at this point 20, has been raised in a dysfunctional home. Now, why do we say dysfunctional? Because Homer is very clear and is going to, I think, really set this up in the following book, which we will not read, but I'll tell you about. When Telemachus goes to talk to the Greek comrades of his father and trying to figure out where he was, he is able to see other family systems, other kingdoms that are much more functional than his. And he reflects on the fact that he did not get to live a full, proper life of an up-and-coming young man because of the war with Troy and because his father is gone. Now, Homer is really clear here. I think the main point of dysfunction, there's really two major points of dysfunction here, is number one, that his father is gone. He is living in a single parent household, which, pardon the edginess, but this is not good. This is not ideal, right? It's a really negative thing from the point of the ancient world and up until today, all right? So why is this particularly bad? I usually like to open that up to my classes and say, why do you guys think that it's bad, at least for this young man, to not be or to be in a home without his father? And usually people jump right up and say, well, number one, there's going to be no one there to teach him, right? There's no one there to teach him how to, quote unquote, be a man in the eyes of that society, to be a competent, honorable, just, and upright person. Okay, fair enough. Well, why can't mom do that? Well, again, my students will usually jump up and say, well, wait a minute, there's too much for her to do at this point because she is managing the home, she's managing his health and well-being, and on top of it, she has to do that. It's like she has to do the job of two all in one. This is unfair to her. So at that level, you have a level, some dysfunction here. Now, there's another level, okay, keep that in mind, but it's got to do with male role models, and just hold off on that for a minute. The fourth major point here that you should take away is that Penelope, very much like Odysseus, is a loyal and very skilled person. Okay. So a really interesting thing about the Odyssey is that you actually get a rather well-developed romance in terms from the ancient stories standards, because usually, what you get in these ancient romances is that so-and-so fell in love and that's about it, or that so-and-so saw someone they thought they were beautiful and then they fell in love. With Odysseus and Penelope, we see that their relationship is very, very equal in some sense. They're both very intelligent, very clever people, and at some point, and especially in the last book we're going to read at the very end of this unit, you actually have some little possible nods to the fact that maybe Penelope is actually cleverer than Odysseus, at least in some regard. So they're a great couple for each other, and they really do have a deep level of loyalty, and she does as well. So every time we praise Odysseus for his loyalty, we need to basically siphon that over to Penelope as well. Now, the fifth point here is the mention of the suitors. Okay, so what are our suitors? Suitors are just people. They're generally the noblemen of Ithaca who come to Penelope and are looking for suit. They're looking to try to court her, to try to be her next husband, because they assume after 10 plus years of fighting and having everyone return from Troy and having Odysseus not return from Troy, they think that she is now a widower. They think that he's dead, and so they want to take his place. Now, Is it because they think that she is gorgeous and amazing and that they want to get with her and have a wonderful, happy marriage and relationship? Probably not. It's probably, I think it's actually certainly not, as we see her accuse them of this later in the story. No, they're very clearly looking to just marry her for, her looks and her, sexiness, basically. And they're also looking to gain the wealth and prosperity of Ithaca. Okay, that's what they want. They're not really after her out of true love. Now, they're taking advantage of his hospitality. Okay, they are mooching off of her. They are not behaving by the standards and customs that we discussed last time, where if you are someone's guest, you need to show them the same, if not more, respect that they are showing you. So guests should leave, you don't want to mooch. You don't want to just sit there forever and keep, like leeching off of their wealth and prosperity. And so, guys, a really important point here is that the suitors in this story, I think, at least when I analyze this work, really represent the true antagonists of the poem. We're going to run into gods, we're going to run into monsters, we're going to run into Cyclops and all this kind of stuff. And yet, I think that Homer leaves the suitors as the final boss, if you want, of this whole story for a very specific reason. I think he's trying to demonstrate to us what true dysfunctional behavior really looks like and what the worst sort of dysfunctional behavior, where it will be found. And that's what the suitors represent. They are a like embodiment of all the dysfunction that we could see. Notice this, please, not just in society, but notice where they are. They are in Odysseus's home, right? They are some embodiment, some symbolic representation of all the dysfunctional practices that could be embodied in one's home life. We don't know the details of that yet, but just hold off because we will learn more about them once we get to the final books, all right? But just know that they are bad guys. The only other piece of information here that we're told about them is that they are plotting to kill Telemachus. Why? Because he theoretically has a better claim on the throne than any of them do. So if, like, let's say Odysseus does not return, then what could happen? Well, Telemachus could say that he is of age and he wants to rule Ithaca now in his father's place. Fair enough. The suitors don't want this to happen, so they're probably going to kill him when he returns. Now, pause. What does that say about their comprehension and their respect for the ancient customs and practices of honor and hospitality? It's non-existent. They're going to kill the child of their host, right? Awful, awful stuff. Now, the last point here, before we summarize or before we analyze this whole thing overall, is Athena is the one who is advising Telemachus, right? Now, it doesn't tell you this in the passage here, but she takes the form of an old man named Mentor, and she encourages him to get out of the house and go act, go find some solution to this dysfunction in your home. Don't just sit there and let it fester if you want. So, a couple things there that we would note just in terms of analyzing the basic literary patterns here. Telemachus doesn't know that it's Athena in the story. He thinks that Mentor is just this guy that's been helping him, that's been advising him, in his father's absence. And yet we, of course, know that he's a lot more than that. He's actually Athena. So we have there a very common trope in ancient literature, and particularly mythic and fantastic, and even religious literature, where someone who seems very much lesser or very plain and ordinary is actually far more than what they appear to be. And that, of course, is the whole shtick with Mentor. He looks like a frail old man, but in reality, what is he? He's actually a god, disguised. Now, and of course, Telemachus still treats him well, right? So then you're rewarded for that on top of everything else. Now, we have, again, the need, or Homer kind of pressing us here with the need for some authority figure in Telemachus's life, aside from mom, right? He needs that archetype of the mentor. He needs that role of a person who is wise enough to guide him through life because he has no, or he doesn't have enough of that in his life. Let's put it that way, okay? And notice what the mentor tells him to do. Get out of your home, right? Go out and experience the world. Or if you think that there is, in fact, a problem, go search for a solution. Do not simply sit and twiddle your thumbs or sit and be terrified and cower in the face of all these issues. Go out and do something about it. Okay. So, very typical um, ancient values that we see here. Okay. Now, and after every book, I usually like to talk to my students about, just as a basic comprehension practice, what sort of ideas and themes do you see emerging so far in the text? And so we're going to do that. And then the last thing we're going to do after every book is discuss the two different ways that we're going to interpret the story in this particular course. Okay. So first and foremost, ideas and themes. What do we see? We see the idea of adventure, of traveling, experience, right? Going out and doing things in the world, not simply remaining home, not simply remaining in a quote unquote safe space. You have to go out and about and do stuff. Okay. You also see this idea of loyalty and responsibility to one's family. Okay. Odysseus very clearly has a sense of loyalty to Penelope and Telemachus, and he feels a deep sense of responsibility that's going to drive him, along with his basic desire to see them. It's going to drive him through the rest of the story. So that's clearly there. We see also what? The respect of those beneath you, like we talked about with Odysseus and his men, right? This is something that we see, that we need to respect underlings, right? We need to, I think it is, as one of the books in Harry Potter, it says that you need to judge someone based on how they treat their inferiors, right? Now, we also see the presence of these ideas of dysfunction and immoral behavior, okay? That's very clearly present here. And we also are given a little bit of a hint of the possibility of temptations that lead us off the path that we should be on in life. Okay. So there's temptations and dysfunctions to deal with here. So that's about like 5 or so ideas that we could extend into themes. I'm not going to bring them into themes just yet. I want to let them kind of be fleshed out a little bit more. But those are some of the basic ideas that I think Homer is presenting us with that are going to continue through this and then develop into clear themes and morals before we are done. Now, the lenses of interpretation, 2 ways that we could interpret the Odyssey, at least for this class. Are there more? Of course, there's tons more. Some of these might be more valid than others. That's fine. But for us and our purposes here as simple ninth grade students and readers, I want you to look at this story in 2 different ways. Number one, as a metaphor for life, like we talked about, that more deep kind of understanding of this story as representing something that we are all going through. That's going to be the first one. The other one is simply as a piece of Homeric education, right? What does Homer, the author, seem to be trying to teach us? What is he trying to teach his audience and the Greek world who are reading these poems, or at least listening to them? So for the myth as a metaphor for the experience of life idea, what do we have here? We see struggles, we see experiences being an idea presented, like we said, by Homer. And we have this image of journeying home and seeking true fulfillment in life. Okay. So, like we talked about last time, I think that's the easiest way to interpret this journey. We have Odysseus trying to get home, trying to get happiness, trying to get the happy ending, the happily forever after, the true fulfillment in life. That's what he's going for. He's trying to get this. Now, like we said in the Iliad, or when we discussed the Iliad, other characters were chasing this as well. However, their source of it, or the road that they took to chase it on, was less noble, was more wrought with tragic dangers, and was ultimately not going to lead them where they wanted to go, which is towards that fulfillment and happiness and joy. It's not going to bring them there. Well, what does seem to be the option or be the correct answer of what's going to bring you there? I think, ladies and gents, Homer is very clearly holding up the image of Odysseus with a loving wife, with a child that they love and have a good relationship in, with a kingdom, in a status, in a point of, or in a position of power and competence, with a kingdom, with a world around them that is functioning and mutually respectful. That is the image, that is the mythic image, the symbol, if you want, of that fulfilling happy ending that we are all looking for. We're looking for contentment on all the different dimensions of life. So the most fundamental dimensions of life, relationships, right? We're looking for a really, truly, deeply loving, intimate relationship in the deepest sense with a romantic person, right? We want to have a good relationship with a husband or wife. We want to have children that we can, share our love with as well. We want to have a family, therefore, that we can love and respect. Friends and people that we work with and all that stuff go along with that as well. That is, I think, our major goal that we're going to be talking about in the Odyssey. How do we achieve it, therefore? And I like to throw that back on my students and ask them, you fast forward, play the whole bucket list game, fast forward to the end of your life when you're like, 80, 90 years old. What do you want? What do you really want? Do you want to have like a bajillion dollars in the bank? It's like, maybe, I guess. Do you want to, be the next Steve Jobs tycoon, titan of Wall Street? Possibly. Do you want to be the next Mr. Playboy who's, had, a bajillion escapades of the most beautiful women in the world? Or do you want to have someone who truly and deeply loves you and have an incredibly fulfilling and happy relationship? Is that what you want? Well, the collective human experience, I think, ladies and gents, has told us that the latter is the one that's going to fulfill us the most. That intimacy and love that come with a relationship, a truly good relationship, is unmatched in its ability to fulfill us. Okay. Maybe there's maybe one thing that could kind of contend with it, but we'll talk about that when we get towards the end of the Odyssey, because Odysseus gets that too, So that's kind of what he's going for. And therefore, what we can look at this story as essentially is now a guide as to how do you get that? How does that actually come about? All right. The other thing here is obviously the Homeric education, right? What do we see that Homer is really trying to teach us here? Well, the first and obvious thing is that we're meant to be living our lives through exemplars, right? That's the main point here. We're going to be given examples of proper behavior in this story, and we're also going to be given examples of negative figures. So just in this first passage, who do we see Homer really wanting us to probably identify with? I think it's obviously Odysseus or Mentor or Penelope. It's certainly not the suitors or even Odysseus's men to a lesser degree, okay? He is showing us here that you ought also to have loyalty and a sense of responsibility to your family, particularly if you're a father, right? We got the old school, if you want to call it patriarchy, if you want to call it sexism, call it what you want, but that's what Homer's selling you here. You also want to be acting out some form of honorable behavior, like we talked about, between the gods, between your neighbors and the people around you, and between the dead. You want to be able to be an honorable and upright man, and of course have a intact and structured family. Now, Homer is, I think, really pushing that last one because, like we said, in the Iliad and in the stories before the Iliad that lead up to the Iliad, one of the major causes of all the dysfunction and tragedy of that story was essentially poor behavior within relationships, within marriages. Okay. And we're going to have a character in this specific story articulate that to us right before the story ends, that it seems like there's something about our most fundamental relationships with our most intimate people that are really going to be where these enormous problems stem from. Our dysfunction in those relationships is where we have a reverberating kind of effect that makes these issues much, much more world destroying in their impact. Okay, so that is book one. Now we have a couple, what do you want to call it? Close reading questions here, right? How has Odysseus been away from, how long has he been away? How and why could we characterize the state of Odysseus' family as dysfunctional? What kind of role does Athena play in Odysseus' family life? And why are the suitors' intentions so dishonorable? We just discussed all those things, all right? So you should be able to answer all four of those remaining questions pretty easily. Okay, quickly now, on to book 5. We're skipping ahead a little bit. Let's read the summary text. It says, for 7 of the 10 years Odysseus has spent wandering the Mediterranean Sea, He has been held captive by the goddess Calypso on her island. As Book 5 begins, Zeus sends the god Hermes to tell Calypso to release Odysseus. However, she is only to help him build a raft. He must sail for 20 days before landing on the island of Scheria, where he will be helped in his effort to return home. Okay, so a couple things there. Um, we see here another addition to the timeline that we were talking about before. The difficult timeline is going to come up towards the end of this, but just know that in terms of sailing around, as we usually imagine the Odyssey happening, that only goes on for about 3 years. And he's been stuck here for 7. So for the understanding of what's about to play out before you, I want you to just kind of imagine that 2/3 of the time that Odysseus has been away has been spent here on this island with Calypso. Now, who is Calypso? She's a divine goddess, right? Not a goddess of the sea, not at a major level like Poseidon, but she's up there. Okay. Now, this brings up a point that I was usually taught about very frequently when I was an English student, which is that we have a diversity of female roles, of feminine roles in Greek literature quite often. So far, we've only seen Penelope, who has been a pretty positive figure, and she's going to become an even more positive figure by the end of this story. And yet now we have a character like Calypso, who it seems is a little bit negative or a little bit unpopular with readers because of her detainment of Odysseus. Odysseus certainly is going to be a little bit troubled with her. So she's a more morally ambiguous figure. And I think that speaks to the idea or the way in which the Greek writers and the Greek imagination liked to portray both genders, male and female, in a very broad diversity of roles, right? So we're not only going to see women who are kind of, meek and passive. We're going to see ones that are much more active and much more noble. We're also going to see ones that are complete monsters. Same thing goes for men. You're not going to see these, complete conniving, weak little boys. You're going to see very, very noble and strong men. And then you'll see some monsters as well, right? So there's a monstrous element in both genders. And the Homeric tradition certainly reminds us of that. Now, cool little detail, by the way, is why does Zeus make Odysseus build the raft by himself? I mean, Calypso is a goddess. She could wave her hand and just make a raft pretty easily. And yet the dictate from Zeus says, can't help Odysseus do much, okay? He is the one who has to sail around. So I'm sorry, I got that detail wrong. She can help him build the raft, but he has to sail by himself, okay? Now, why? Why are they making him do this? Keep that in the back of your head. Okay. Why? Why are we being apparently made to work harder than is apparently necessary by the gods? Keep this in mind, right? Because it seems on the beginning of it, it seems a little bit unfair. It seems a little bit annoying and troublesome. Okay, now, I'm not going to read the entire passage to you. We're going to skim through it quite a bit, okay? So Hermes comes down. He flies down. And there's a nice description at the beginning here of how his sandals, of course, his flying sandals carry him over the water, over the endless span. Fun little note, humanities note, the image of a being passing over the water. This is a typical feature that goes along with divine figures. So if you go back in the Hebrew Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, you have the description of God traveling over the tofu babohu. Can't ever get my Hebrew right, where he travels over the formless chaos. And you get that reiterated when Jesus walks on the water, right? That also is seen here when we have the demigods and gods of Greek mythology walking and passing over the water. We get an example of our first heroic simile, our first epic simile. And it starts here. It says a gull. So Hermes is going to be compared to a gull. Let's take a look. A gull patrolling between the wave crests of the desolate sea will dip to catch a fish and douse his wings. No higher above the whitecaps, Hermes flew until the distant lands lay ahead. So what does it tell us about him? This little random passage that Homer adds in about our character. It tells us, number one, that he's powerful, that he's a god, right? He's graceful, and that there is what? Some need for an emphasis on this, right? Homer wants to emphasize the grandness, okay, the otherworldliness of the gods. And that fits in with the genre, of course, because this is an epic poem, right? We're supposed to have the grandness of subject matter here, the kind of profundity of the subject matter that we're dealing with. So he's describing the god, kind of like head on down, which is an amazingly fantastical image on top of it. Now, for number 3, how is the island described here and why? Well, at the bottom of that big stanza, we have this description, divine Calypso and her isle. Upon her hearthstone of a blazing fire, let's see, scented with the farthest shores and cedar smoke, smoke of time and singing high. So she kind of brings him in and shows him, this wonderful little place that she has set up where she's got a fire brewing. We have this description in the middle stanza there of what do we got? The cypress growing, the back poplar, the crooked vines and the swirling, trees and vegetation, the violets and tender parsley all over the place. So, and then it goes on and on and on and talks about the way that the waves move and all this kind of stuff. It's meant to be paradisical, right? Or paradise-like, right? It's meant to be very positive. It's meant to be idyllic because, of course, it's the island of a goddess. Why would it not be? Now, it's something that even a god, as it describes, would be enthralled with. So even someone like Hermes, who lives on Olympus, right, who lives at the height of beauty and peace and joy, up there in bliss, he even likes this place. Okay, and yet, what description do we get next? This is at the bottom of the stanza. Okay, right here. It says, "But he saw nothing," that is Hermes, saw nothing of the great Odysseus, who sat apart as 1,000 times before and racked his own heart groaning with eyes wet, scanning the bare horizon of the sea. So Hermes doesn't see Odysseus anywhere, but the narrator tells us that Odysseus has been doing what? Something that he's been doing a lot for the past 7 years. He has been, excuse me, sitting away from Calypso and her maids and just crying on the seashore. Okay, why? Why? Let's find out a little bit later. First, we get a little passage here, a description of what Hermes is up to, what Hermes is there for. Calypso invites him to sit for food. Hermes explains that he has brought an order from Zeus that we just talked about. And basically here, we learn that she is reluctant to let him go. Okay. Now, why is this, of course? We'll find out in a minute, but she does not want to let him go. Why has she been keeping him here in the first place? We're not totally sure. And she is reluctant to let him go, but of course she knows that it is Zeus who's commanding this, so she does eventually do it. And she goes to offer him some advice. So she goes to him, okay? Now, we get this description on the top of the page, telling us what they've been up to on the island. It's going to give us some more insight into that interaction that we just had there. So it says, the sweet days of his lifetime were running out in anguish over his exile. For long ago the nymph had ceased to please, that is Calypso, had ceased to please. Though he fought shy of her and her desire, he lay with her each night, for she compelled him. But when day came, he sat on the rocky shore and broke his own heart, groaning, with eyes wet, scanning the bare horizon of the sea. Okay, so let me get this straight. Odysseus has been here for 7 years, and he's not able to get home, right? He's got no raft, and he cries all day on this island that looks like paradise, looks like a sandals resort on steroids. And then in the evenings, what does he do? He goes and he lays with Calypso. What does that mean? That means he has sex with Calypso every night. And we have a couple details here. He fights shy of her. He tries to avoid it, right? And yet she compels him because she's a goddess. She can do this kind of stuff. So, by the way, is that rape? Is that non-consensual sex from the goddess? Kinda. The Greeks are very ambiguous about this thing, accordingly, of course, because you can't refuse gods. You don't want to refuse gods. Something bad usually happens. So she makes him do this. And I like to open that up, a little bit to my students, particularly my female students, and ask them, is this cheating? Is Odysseus cheating on his wife here? The poem seems to be, and I think Homer seems to be thinking, not entirely. Because, like we just said, the setup is that you really have not many great options here. So probably not, but it's still not a good situation for him. And although on top of it, he actually says what, or he has communicated to us through the narrator, what, that he does not want to do this. So even though this is happening, even though Calypso wants him here, she's still going to let him go. But with a little kind of like parting trap, if you want. So she sits and talks to him, and she gives him this line. Really interesting little interaction that she says. She says, "Son of Laertes, that is Odysseus's father, versatile Odysseus, after these years with me, you still desire your old home? Even so, I wish you well. If you could see it all before you go, all the adversity you face at sea, you would stay here and guard this house and be immortal, though you wanted her forever, that bride of whom you pine each day. Can I be less desirable than she, less interesting, less beautiful? Can mortals compare with goddesses in grace and form?" So, a couple things. She points out to him that, fine, I know that you want your wife, and we're gonna let you go. But if you could see how your journey is going to be, you probably would want to stay. And like, same. It's like same with everyone in life. If we could all, get a glimpse of what our life would look like, all the things we're going to have to go through before we get to we start on our journey, yeah, it would probably terrify us even more. So spooky. Now, she asks, "Can your wife really compare with me?" Now, who's paying attention here? Because that should immediately throw up a lot of red flags. We see that there's a very serious trap being laid here for Odysseus. Calypso is trying to essentially bait him into saying what? "No, my wife is better than you." Okay. And what would happen then? Calypso would have some means of inflicting some level of more suffering on him, right? So that's not a good idea. It's not a good answer. Don't come out and say that. However, on the flip side, do you want to be dishonest and say, "No, my wife, totally sucks. You're right. I would prefer to stay here with you"? No, because he loves her. He does sincerely. So how are you going to get out of this? Well, look at what he says. To this, the strategist, right? So the clever, the wise Odysseus answered, "My lady goddess, here is no cause for anger. My quiet Penelope, how well I know, would seem a shade before your majesty, death and old age being unknown to you, while she must die. Yet it is true each day I long for home, long for the sight of home." So ironically, guys, how does the clever Odysseus get out of this very apparently dangerous rhetorical trap? Hmm. He does what I call telling the truth and telling the whole truth, not just, selective truths. He tells the entire truth. Listen, does Penelope compare to Calypso in looks? No, she doesn't. Which, a bunch of my students jump up at that point. They'll say, "Oh my God, are you saying like you can say that someone's more pretty than your girlfriend or your wife?" Yeah, you can say that. That's okay, right? Like if goddesses do in fact exist, then yes, they're going to be more beautiful than us mortals. That's fine. He says it, and Penelope is going to look like dust essentially next to you. But, but, what? I still want to be with her. I still want to go home. Okay. Which is kind of sweet, actually. It's basically showing us that, is Odysseus hyper interested, hyper obsessed with just looks and beauty, kind of a la, Paris from the previous story? No, he wants his wife. He wants the love and the commitment with her. Okay, fantastic stuff. Now, let's see. We then get another little passage of summary. So he does go, right? With Calypso's help, Odysseus builds a raft and sets out to sea. For 17 days, it says he sails until he is in sight of Scheria. And for 3 days, he is pummeled by storms and finally swims for the island. He makes it safely ashore and crawls to rest among the bushes. Okay, so that's basically all we need for the major readings therein. Now, what's up, Zeus? Why are you hitting him with so much storms and all this kind of stuff? Why? We're not sure yet. We got to wait. We're not totally sure, but it seems like this guy's journey is being made more and more difficult, at least to some degree, even as we're at the end of the journey here. Okay. So let's talk about the themes and ideas that we could catch in the reading for number 5. All right. I picked out about 3 that we could come up with, at least right off the top of my head. The idea of struggling and suffering, right? This suffering from being away from home, the struggle to build the raft, the struggle to leave, the struggle to have to put up with, with Calypso, yeah, that's rough. Loyalty to family and love, right? That's another big thing that we have Homer focusing on here. We have a man who is, like I just said, on a sandals resort on steroids, and is also sleeping with a goddess every night, and yet still wants to leave, wants to go home. He is not going to be, distracted by this sort of stuff. Okay. Now, lastly, you have, I think, the idea of humility before the gods, right? Odysseus is still humble and respectful to Calypso, even though he does not really want to be with her, right? He still is respectful. He still is kind of giving her her due, all that kind of stuff. Now, let's talk about the lenses. How do we interpret this, right? How do we interpret these stories? So the idea of the metaphor for life, what do we see here? I think that this is a possible metaphor for choosing true, intimate love. In other words, a true relationship over basic sensual pleasure or shallow comfort. Okay. So Odysseus is given 2 options here. You can live it up like a playboy. You can be young and, have sex with Calypso every single night and call it a day, right? That's your life. Sure. Now that, translate that into real life. That's us, jumping from one girl, one guy, whatever, like one, casual relationship to the next again and again and again and again for the rest of our lives, never actually establishing a true romantic relationship with people. On the other side, we have this idea of comfort, this temptation of comfort. He could stay here and not have to weather all the things that we know he will have to weather if he goes, that Calypso tells us about. And yet he doesn't. He chooses not comfort, not sexual gratification, shallow sexual gratification, but he actually chooses to pursue a responsible, moral, and intimate romantic relationship. That's what he's going for here. Okay. So, in our pursuit of that goal that we're talking about in life, we need to be aware, right? And those temptations are going to come back up for us. But this notion that on our journey, right, on our long journey of life towards that point of happiness, there are these islands, if you want. There are these places where we are shipwrecked for a while, where we are stuck. And I love the image here because you have him the majority of his time trying to get to this ideal home. He's stuck. He is unable to kind of break free from this island. It's basically like someone becoming stagnant in their development in life as a person, right? That's what we see happening here with him. But he is, able to be kind of moved out of it with some divine help, with some help from Athena, of course. Okay. The other one here is, of course, what is Homer trying to teach us? Men, be faithful to your wives. I think he's very clearly kind of hammering that one home. Like, that's the kind of guy you want to be. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If Aphrodite, kicks in your door and, demands to have sex with you, don't be an idiot about that. Try to, navigate that complex situation as you will, but still be faithful to your wife. Okay. Respect the power of the gods overall. Okay. Now, we asked, of course, the question to conclude book 5, which is why is Zeus pummeling Odysseus so much and helping him as well, right? Because he is helping him, but he's also kind of not making it too easy for him. I'm not sure because it's complicated, right? And that's essentially a good one-word description of what the gods are like in Greek mythology. They're complex. We don't fully know what they're trying to do or what their plan is, okay? If there is a plan. So keep that in mind because that's going to come up in the end of book 9 here. Okay, now to wrap it up, we're going to cover book 9 relatively quickly. Let's take a look. Summarizing passage. What's it say? In book 6 to 8, Odysseus is welcomed by King Alcinous. By the way, I apologize for mispronouncing Uranus, the being in the previous video. It's not Uranus, it's Uranos. Okay, Uranos. Please forgive me. So Uranos, and by this one also Alcinous, or Alcinous is usually how I've heard it pronounced. All my Greek friends in the comment section, please kill me. King Alcinous does what? He gives a banquet in Odysseus's honor. That night, the king begs Odysseus to tell who he is and what has happened to him. And then in book 9 to 12, Odysseus relates his adventures to the king. Okay, so a couple things here. King Alcinous, being a good boy, is very hospitable. Finds a guy on the shore, brings him in for hospitality, gives him a full banquet and a feast, yada, yada, yada. Good moral exemplar right there. And right here we have the introduction of this element of the story that gets a lot of students tripped up. So try to follow me so that we don't cause more confusion than is needed. Odysseus sits down with King Alcinous, and the king says, please tell me your story, tell me who you are. Okay. And then for the next 3 books, we're going to have the narration by Odysseus. And he's going to tell us what happened to him on his first 3 years of traveling. Okay. So if you want, this is a flashback. This is what we call a frame narrative. It's a very long flashback, and that's why we would prefer to call it a frame narrative. And a frame narrative is essentially where we have a story that begins and we're kind of reading it along and it's going, it's going, it's going. And then within that story, you have another story that is not actually chronologically completely connected with that story. The best example I can think of this is the Arabian Nights. So you grab the Arabian Nights, and what is it basically? It's the story of a woman trying to tell a king a bunch of stories in the middle of the night. And that's what the stories of the Arabian Nights are. Now, that story is like a very small part of the whole structure of that entire work, but all the little stories in between, that's what the Arabian Nights really are. And then, of course, the story ends with her concluding that. Now, we see this something similar within the Odyssey, right? Odysseus's most famous journeys on his voyage home happen within this frame narrative and this flashback that he gives us for the next 3 books. Okay, so what does he say? Let's take a look. What shall I say first? What shall I keep until the end? The gods have tried me in 1,000 ways, but first my name. Let that be known to you. And if I pull away from pitiless death, friendship will bind us, though my land lies far away. I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Okay, so what is Odysseus narrating in books 9 to 12? Like we just said, he is narrating all of what happened to him when he left for Troy. Okay, because we only found him like 10 years after he left for Troy. So, buddy, fill in the blanks for us, please. And we know that 7 of those 10 years were just hanging out with Calypso. So, what happened with the other 3 years? Explain. That's what he's going to do here. Okay. Now, let's see. He tells us something about himself in the beginning here. He says, men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. My home is on the peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount, speaking of mispronunciations, Neons, wind-blown robes of leaves, blah, 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 blah. He goes on to give us this long, very beautiful explanation of where he lives. And he says, or where he was from, which is, of course, Ithaca. Being most lofty in the coastal seas northwards, a rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight. As Circe of Aea, I think that's how you pronounce it, the enchantress desired me and detained me in her hall, but in my heart I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. What of my sailing then? What of Troy? What of those years of rough adventure, weathered under Zeus? Okay, so how is he characterized right there? Once again, the loyalty comes smashing through his sole desire, his kind of laser-focused desire on home, Penelope, Telemachus, family. That's what I want. I don't want to be a bajillionaire. I don't want to live in a hall of gold. I don't want to live with Circe or Calypso or any of those other goddesses. I want to be with the girl that I love and with my family. Okay, beautiful. Now, we get the injection here, the introduction. of a passage summarizing some information between. What does it tell us? Odysseus explains that soon after leaving Troy, he and his crew land near Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. The Cicones are allies of the Trojans and therefore enemies of Odysseus. Odysseus and his crew raid the Cicones, robbing and killing them until the Ciconian army kills 72 of Odysseus's men and drives the rest to sea. Delayed by a storm for 2 days, Odysseus and his remaining companions continue their journey, right? So immediately after leaving Troy, he has kind of a rough time, right? He does not have a good time. He immediately is attacked by some Trojan allies. And then we get this first real challenge for him. Let's read this one. It says, I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came around to Malea, the current took me out to sea, and from the north, a fresh gale drove me on, past Cytherea. 9 days I drafted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th, we came to the coastline of the lotus eaters, who live on that flower. We landed there to take on water, all ship's companions mustering alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men the island sustained. They fell in soon enough with the lotus eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only to offer the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor return. They longed to stay forever browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. Okay, so number 3, how are the lotus eaters dangerous to Odysseus and his men? If they eat the lotus flowers, this will cause them, magically, apparently, to become sedentary, apathetic, slothful. Sedentary meaning they're not going to move, they're just going to stay there. Apathetic meaning they don't care about anything except eating the freaking flower. They become slothful, which, by the way, like we talked about in the Divine Comedy back in the humanities class, slothful doesn't mean lazy. Slothful means that you don't have proper care for things that you should care about, right? So, for example, getting home to your wife to help your wife and son to whom you have a responsibility. That should be something you care about. They would be taken away. If they eat the flower, bam, it's gone. It also is very clearly something that is addictive, right? They want more and more and more of it, right? Leading to the suffering of, if they do this, right, it will cause all these things: sedentary, apathetic behavior, slothful behavior, and addictive behavior. And it will also, ladies and gents, cause Odysseus to not get home to Penelope and Telemachus, which will then cause them to suffer under the suitors, right? Might even cause one of them to die. So you have here, if you want, the first real temptation on this journey towards a properly fulfilling life. The first temptation is to remain sedentary, is to just do nothing, right? To just sit on the couch and not have any drive at all, right? And I love a couple things about this. I love that it's the first temptation because it really is the major temptation that keeps people from making this pursuit in life. We tend to, in our culture and human nature overall, we tend to ignore that question of like, what is the purpose and drive and kind of focus of our lives? We prefer just to kind of treat life like it is a sandbox, like it's a vacation, except for the 5 days we have to work each week, and we just kind of live for the weekend and then rinse and repeat. That is not how the ancient world saw it, and that's also not, I think, a very healthy way to look at life. A much more healthy way is like we see Odysseus doing, which is you have a goal, like you have something that you clearly want to do, you have some morals that you're trying to follow, and some things you're trying to overcome within yourself and in the external world in order to get towards this goal, which, by the way, is a lot more fulfilling than sitting on a beach eating some tasty plants your entire life, okay? That is so freaking lame. That is so pathetic compared to what you're going to be able to have, what kind of life you're going to be able to have if you follow in Odysseus's path. Okay. Now, what else here? couple little cool notes in the diction or in the style of this particular passage. Notice they're described as lotus eaters. They're not described as any sort of racial group, any sort of ethnic group at all. It's like their identity has been kind of taken away from them. They're just defined by what they eat, right? You are what you eat. So you kind of see that here. They've lost their humanity in some sense. It says they wish to do us no harm at all. Now, I like to ask the question, well, define harm, right? Because we just talked about how the lotus eaters are actually quite harmful. And this is something that a lot of my students have picked up on. It's kind of an argument from the ancient world against drug and substance abuse, where if we're in the end of this year when we talk about legalization of marijuana and all this kind of stuff, there's this argument that we usually hear that there's like no real harm in just kind of sitting in your home and taking whatever substances you want. We usually have students, or we have at least these ancient authors, protesting against this. Because if you do it to such a degree where you become stagnant and apathetic, and essentially, as my mother would say, completely useless, yes, that is bad. That is going to have a negative impact on all the people in your life, right? Imagine if your parents behave that way. That is really dysfunctional. That is really bad. You will suffer as a result of this. And if you want the more kind of simple and cartoonish version of this lesson, guys, or of this temptation and this problem here, just go watch The Lion King. This is essentially all that Simba is struggling with when he chooses to sit around and eat bugs, as opposed to go and solve the problems back at home. Okay. So Odysseus, by the way, has to do what? If you want, I'm not going to read it for you, but we can kind of just skim through it. He has to drive his men back, right? He actually cannot just give them a 12 steps intervention program and tell them, have them use their own willpower to get back. No, he has to force them to get back. Okay. Showing us two things. Temptation, once again, is another major theme in the Odyssey. It's another major idea that's going to come back up again and again and again. But it's also showing us here the idea that some temptations are going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to resist. So keep an eye on that. All right. Now, we move on to the Cyclopses. All right. Probably the most famous interaction of this entire epic poem is between Odysseus and the Cyclops Polyphemus. So Odysseus gets his men out of there. And what do we get here? The entrance, or the arrival onto the land of the Cyclopses, which is probably Sicily, by the way. So in the next land, it says, we found where Cyclopses, giants, louts, without a law to bless them, in ignorance. I'm sorry, I keep reading this wrong. In the next land, we found were what we found were giants, Cyclopses, louts, without a law to bless them, in ignorance, leaving the fruitage of the earth in mystery to the immortal gods. They neither plow nor sow by hand, nor till the ground, though grain, wild wheat, and barley grows unattended, and wine grapes in clusters ripen in the heavens' rain. Cyclopses have no muster and no meeting, no consultation or tribal ways, but each one dwells in his own mountain cave, dealing out rough justice to wife and child, indifferent to what others do. Okay, so for number 4, how does he, that is Odysseus and Homer, characterize the Cyclopses? So of course we know, what is a Cyclops? It's a giant with one eye. Okay, now couple things. We have here our first real introduction of a monster proper, right? A beast. And a little side note about fantasy works or mythic works and works of horror and stuff like this. A monster, whether it's Dracula, whether it's Frankenstein, whether it's a xenomorph, whether it's a ghost, whether it's a demon, whatever you want to call it, they are, in some sense, at the very least, they are an embodiment of some deep-seated fear that we have as human beings. And in a more specific way, depending on the monster, whatever monster you're looking at, they are an embodiment of the specific fears and dysfunctional and moral views about dysfunction that culture has at that time. So when we're looking at the Cyclops, what we're really seeing is a depiction by Homer of all of the behaviors that the Greeks don't value and they think of as monstrous. So there's about 5 points of characterization in that passage we just looked at. The first one is that the Cyclopses are lawless, they are anarchical, right? They are disordered, they are chaotic. So that right away, Homer was like, no, no, you can't have chaos, you can't have lawlessness, you need justice, you need order, you need some structure to society. Absolutely. The second point is that, interestingly enough, they have no agriculture, right? They don't, have any notion of how to till the earth, right? They're barbaric in the antiquated sense. So in antiquity, in the ancient world, if you were nomadic, if you only, ate whatever you found, this is seen by this culture in particular as very barbaric, as very savage, because you haven't been able to sit down and really learn more about the world and how to craft food out of the world. So you're seen as less developed here. Okay. So we got someone who's lawless, someone who's less developed. And then number three, they have no organization, traditions, or hierarchy. Again, going back to that anarchy kind of idea, there's no order and structure to their society. They're just kind of running around doing what they want to do. So again, chaos, not so good here. Number four, they're alone. They dwell in isolation. They are antisocial. Okay. Always got one kid in the back of the class and say, "Oh no, he's just an introvert." No, no. Big, easy distinction here, by the way, for my psych friends. Difference between an introvert and an antisocial person. Introverts are people who do not need a lot of people around them to kind of generate energy and enthusiasm and motivation. That's kind of what an introvert will be like. That's why introverts get very tired at parties, because it's like, they're kind of giving out their own energy at a party and they're like, wow, this is very draining. They're not antisocial though. Antisocial means you don't like to be around people. You don't like people in general. So this idea of isolation is a really deep-seated idea in the ancient mindset and all the way through the literature that we would always look at. Essentially, you're always going to see villains and monstrous people dwelling in isolation. Okay. Now, interestingly, the last one, they deal out rough justice to wife and child, in difference to what others do. In other words, they're abusive to their wife and their children. So domestically abusive figures are seen as negative here. Okay, going back to what we talked about, both about Odysseus as a really good male role model for Telemachus, but also as we talked about with how Odysseus treats those who are quote unquote underneath him in the eyes of society. So the Cyclopses just are monstrous simply in their behavior. Don't even think about their looks, right? Their actual structure of their physical being. No, no, they're just monstrous in their behavior first and foremost. Okay. Now we can skip ahead quite a bit because we see that Odysseus goes in and he sees that the Cyclops' cave, because he hasn't met one yet, he sees that the cave is filled with cheese and that there's sheep, and they think that this is a shepherd's home, blah, 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 blah. And it's more and more solitude, of course. And he comes in for number 4 here, or number 5 for you guys. And he brings gifts to the Cyclops. Why? It's hospitality, right? Got to bring the hospitality laws. He comes and he does this. So Cyclops comes in, and then for the next one, by the way, why does he refuse his men? Because his men want to eat the cheese and just kind of take the materials and go. This would be, of course, very much breaking the hospitality laws. Okay, which, by the way, gives us a little bit of early characterization of Odysseus's men. They're willing to just steal this apparent shepherd's food and material and just leave with it, showing us that their development as moral people is probably in need of some updates. Okay. Now, number 7, jump all the way down here. Odysseus meets with the Cyclops, and he says, what? We are from Troy, Achaeans, blown off course by shifting gales of the great South Sea, homeward bound, but taking routes in ways uncommon, so that the will of Zeus would have it. We served under Agamemnon, son of Atreus. The whole world knows what city we laid waste, what armies he destroyed. He laid waste, what armies he destroyed. Beholden for your help or any gifts you give, a custom is to honor strangers, as custom is to honor strangers. We would entreat you, great sir, have a care for the gods' courtesy, Zeus will avenge the unoffending guest. Okay, so again, Odysseus' speech is really emphasizing the value of hospitality, both of guests and of hosts, right? We need this. He's trying to remind the Cyclops of this, as the thing is like towering above him, quite menacingly. And look at the Cyclops' response. You are a ninny. I hate terrible translation, right? You are to be like you are a fool, or else you come from the other end of nowhere, telling me mind the gods. We Cyclopses care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus, or all the gods in bliss. We have more force by far. I would not let you go for fear of Zeus, you or your friends, unless I had a whim to. Tell me, where was it now you left your ship? Around the point or down the shore, I wonder? Okay, so number 8, one of the last, there's probably two more. One of the next pieces of information that we get about the Cyclops, really kind of showing him to be monstrous, is how do they think about the gods? He thinks that they are irrelevant. They are utterly insignificant to him, right? He thinks that he is much stronger than the gods. Is this true? No, it's not. 100% not. And what have I taught you about Greek literature? As soon as you insult the gods, what do you basically need to do? You basically need to get a stopwatch for 24 hours and know that you're going to suffer dramatically within that 24 hours, okay? As a result of how you've responded to or as a result of your insult to the gods. So he does this and he asks Odysseus, where's your ship? You know, why? Why do you want to know that? Probably not a good idea to tell him where that is, right? Because he's huge and giant and probably wants to go smash it and then eat you, okay? So what's he do? Odysseus, again, being kind of smart, says, my ship, Lord Poseidon, who sets the sea a tremble, the earth a tremble, broke it up on the rocks at your land's end. A wind from seaward served him, drove us here. We are survivors, these good men and I. Neither reply nor pity came from him, but in one stride he clutched at my companions and caught two in his hand like squirming puppies to beat their brains out, spattering the floor. Then he dismembered them and made his meal, gaping and crunching like a mountain lion. Everything, innards, flesh, and marrowed bones. Okay, whoa, like we just went from 0 to 100 right there. So he hears that the ships are apparently not there. It's a lie from Odysseus just to get him to leave the ships alone, right? But what does he do now? Thinking that the men have no way of escape, he goes and grabs two of them, and it says like squirming puppies, right? He's got to pick a sad metaphor, it's like a sad simile like that. He twirls them around and he smashes their brains out, and then he just gobbles them down, and we get this very graphic kind of image of that. Okay. Ew. Now, we're looking for, as the question says, 3 solid reasons why this is so atrocious, right? The most obvious one is that it's murder, right? It's killing someone who is unarmed. It's killing someone who is not in combat with you in battle. It's totally unjustified, right? He is killing someone. He's murdering them unjustly. Now, the second reason, it's kind of cannibalism. Oh, but they're not. It's technically the same species. It's cannibal. Whatever. Okay, fine. It's one humanoid person eating another humanoid person. Ew, right? There's an old school, very deep and primordial fear of cannibalism right then and there too. Okay, so we have cannibalism. It's also an interesting little feature. It's raw food, right? It's food that has not been cooked. So let's go back to the whole idea about barbarism and savagery, right? The idea of not being able to kind of take care of your food or kind of really take as much out of the earth as you possibly could. Same thing goes for cannibalism here, right? The Greeks saw cannibalism, many cultures did, not just cannibalism, but eating raw food as a sign that you are a beast, that you are closer to the roughness and savagery of nature than you are to civilization, okay? So raw food. And then another reason is like 5, by the way. Another reason here is that he is harming a guest in his home. He is killing and murdering guests in his home flippantly. Okay. Wow. And then, of course, the last point of honor there is that you are also defiling a dead body, right? You are killing these men and then you are defiling their bodies by eating them. They're not going to really get a proper burial now. So at every level, the Greeks would see this as like an incredibly monstrous and horrifying act. Okay. Now, what happens next? basically we have a little bit of a time pause here because he doesn't just kill them all right there. He does this and he kind of rolls a boulder over the doorway of the cave that only he can move, closes it, and then kind of goes to sleep after talking with the men a little bit more. Okay. Now, number 10 is asking, what is Odysseus' plan here? Why is it so clever? So the question here is, how are you going to get out of the cave alive, right? How are you going to get you and your men back to the ship without getting killed in droves by the Cyclops? Well, we learned that Odysseus could probably kill the Cyclops while he is laying there sleeping. He could probably do that. But of course, if you kill him, who's going to move the stone? So we're in a bit of a dilemma here because you've got to get out without killing the Cyclops, but you also got to get out without dying, right? So what does he do? He, of course, does what? He chooses to sedate him with wine, first and foremost, right? And gets him a little bit drunk. And then he blinds him with a hole that he sharpens to like a stake point once he's asleep. Stabs him, knowing that now that he's blind, he can't get us as easily. And he's going to try to get out of the cave. Now, he comes up with that plan, right, before he actually enacts it, of course. And we have a little bit of a discussion here as he's having him drink the wine and he's talking all this kind of stuff. And of course, Odysseus is asked his name by the Cyclops because we know his name. The Cyclops didn't know it just yet. So the Cyclops asks, what? Where do you come from, basically? Who are you? And he says right here, Cyclops, you ask my honorable name. Remember the gift you promised me, and I shall tell you. My name is Nobody. Mother, father, and friends, everyone calls me Nobody. Uh-huh. So in other words, nobody, nobody. Okay, nessuno in Italian, as I learned, right? That's what his name is. Why is he not giving him his real name? Why would you not give the monster your name? It's like not a good idea, right? Don't want them to know your home address. So he gives him this fake name. And it's going to be a very useful fake name, as we're going to see in a moment. Okay. So we need to do number 12. It's just simile, right? He stabs him in the eye, it pops, it's gross, it's hideous, typical Homer gore. Number 13, what do the other Cyclopses think that is causing Polyphemus pain? So Polyphemus comes out of the cave and he starts yelling, and his neighboring Cyclops asks, what's wrong? What's up? And he says, nobody has blinded me. Nobody has blinded me. Okay, so now you see the point of Odysseus' plan here. It's basically to get him to be ignored by the other Cyclopses. Okay, now, as we come to the end here, important bits. We know his plan, right? And number 15, how has Odysseus acted differently and foolishly? So what does he do? They're running back to the ship. They get on the ship. And what does he do to the Cyclops? He says, oh, Cyclops. So notice this. He's on the ship, right? He's getting off the island. And the Cyclops is, flailing around, feeling around all over the place. And inside of the ship, right, if he could see it, they can still see him. And Odysseus yells back at Polyphemus and says what? Oh, Cyclops, would you feast on my companions? Puny am I in a caveman's hands? How do you like the beating that we gave you, you damned cannibal, eater of guests under your roof? Zeus and the gods have paid you. The blind thing in his doubled fury did what? Broke a hilltop in his hands and heaved it after us, right? So he hears Odysseus out there and he picks up the rock and throws it at him, right? He throws a huge boulder at him. Now, of course, what? The men start to say, God's sake, Captain, why bait him again? Leave him alone. Like, stop yelling at him. You're kind of like playing Marco Polo with him. He knows where we are. Now, what does he say? He says, give me, let's see, blah, 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 blah. Let's see, Cyclops. There we go. Famous part. Cyclops, if ever mortal man inquire how you were put to shame and blinded, tell him Odysseus, raider of cities, took your eye. Laertes' son, whose home's on Ithaca. Number 15, how has he acted differently and foolishly here? Why is this so stupid? It's because you have gotten caught up in your own, sense of victory, your own kind of happiness in your safety now, and you have arrogantly boasted to the Cyclops who you are and where to find you. And as a result, now what is going to happen? He says, come back, Odysseus, and I'll treat you well. praying the god of earthquake to befriend you. His son am I, for he by his avowal fathered me, and if he will, he may heal me of this black wound, he and no other of all the happy gods and mortal men. Okay, so we find out that Polyphemus's father is god of the earthquakes. That's Poseidon. He says, "Come back, and I'll treat you well. I'll pray to Poseidon to help you." Do we buy that? Probably not, right? Probably not a good idea. Odysseus doesn't buy it, but he curses him back, right? He says, what does he say? Blah, 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 blah. If I could take your life, I would take it, your time away and hurl you down to hell. The god of the earthquakes could not heal you there. So he just, flicks him off verbally there. And this Polyphemus does, he stretches out his hands and he utters a curse, basically. He says, "Oh, hear me, Lord, blue girdler of the islands. If I am thine indeed, and thou art father, grant that Odysseus, raider of cities, never see his home, Laertes' son, I mean, who kept his hall on Ithaca. Should destiny intend that he shall see his roof again among his family and his fatherland, far be that day, and dark the years between. Let him lose all companions and return under strange sail to bitter days at home." Okay. So notice what happens here. Polyphemus gives us this curse that basically says what? Let you not get home. And if you do get home, make it be a really long journey. And in between, may you suffer and may all of your men die, basically. And when you do get home, if you do get home, make sure that it's under a terrible situation, okay? So we're listening to this, by the way, 7 years or 10 years after it happened. Did it come true? Seems like it so far. Okay, so we're getting kind of the origin as to what really might have kept Odysseus away for so long, right? Polyphemus's curse. Now, number 17 here. That, of course, explains that, right? That's what we just said. And then number 18, in what ways has Odysseus cursed himself? Now, this is the tricky part, okay, to understand here. Is Polyphemus solely to blame here? Yes, partially. But can we blame Odysseus at all? I think so, because he's the one who bragged to Polyphemus. He's the one who was arrogant and boastful to him. And as a result, he will not be able to get home now. So we then get the last stanza here where Odysseus gets on shore somewhere else, somewhere safe, and he tries to make an offering to Zeus. But it says what? "But Zeus disdained my offering, destruction for my ships he had in store, and death for those who sailed them, my companions." Why? Why does Zeus reject his offering? Because, ladies and gentlemen, what is it that he is really looking for here? He is looking for development. He is looking for growth from Odysseus, I think. He is looking to, yes, punish him for his arrogance, for his pride, for sure. But he's also looking to shape him into something more than what he is now. Okay? So we could also say, I think we could say just that, all right? Now, let's conclude this real quick. Before we do number 20, actually, let's do number 20 now. Yeah, what is Homer sort of implying here between our actions and the gods as punishment? What do you suspect the gods want from people? So the relationship that's being implied here is that your actions will directly lead to their own punishments in some regard, right? Because look at what happened to Polyphemus. Polyphemus insulted the gods. Did the gods zap him right then and there? No. They allowed whatever was going to happen because of his arrogance to happen to him. Same thing with Odysseus, kind of. Does his arrogance immediately get him punished by the gods? Kind of not really. I mean, like, they just allow Polyphemus's curse to kind of go through, right? If there's magic in it or if Poseidon's going to grant it, whatever, they're like, fine, do that. So in some sense, the gods don't need to, strike you with lightning and kind of curse you directly. They just allow your own sins to be their own punishment because they very often do just act as their own punishments, okay? It's a very deep, ancient mentality there. You see the same thing in the Old Testament, right? There was a famous rabbi who basically used to teach the punishment for breaking the Ten Commandments is breaking the Ten Commandments. Is this? There's like an inherent lessening of yourself. There's an inherent punishment, whether it's through guilt and shame and all the consequences that follow, that's the punishment. It doesn't have to be God, casting you into hell immediately. It's just all the things that come with that behavior. Same thing here. Why do you suspect the God? What do you suspect the gods want from people, therefore? They want them to be humble, to give honor to the gods, give honor and respect and humility to each other. And as we're going to see, I think, grow through that process. Okay, that's what they're looking for here. That's why they're not doing everything for Odysseus throughout these 3 books. And that's why they're going to be okay with Odysseus struggling for the next 10 years. Okay, to conclude, ideas and themes in this last one. We see temptation, right? Temptation away from home, right? With the Lotus Eaters. Foolish and dysfunctional behavior with both the Lotus Eaters and with the men, right? With his men and with how we behaved with Polyphemus. We see wickedness and inhospitality in Polyphemus, right? We see that kind of immediate flash of what evil kind of looks like in this culture. We then see the vengeance and the justice of the gods and what it looks like and what it will, or why it's there, kind of what it's meant to be there for, okay, or how it works out sometimes. Okay. Now, a couple other little notes about this section here. Odysseus is heroic here for his cleverness and his faith and desire and his love for home. That's something that we really need to crystallize in our understanding of this text. He is not just heroic because he's clever, right? He's heroic because he is completely loyal to his family and he wants to be there for his family no matter what life throws at him. And then the third, I think, of the maybe 4 notes we should take about this text so far is the power of the lotus eater, of the lotus temptation, the temptation of the lotus flower is going to be a recurring temptation throughout the rest of the books in the Odyssey. Okay, so keep an eye out for temptations like this. Monsters here, like we're going to see more monsters, by the way. They are, like we just said, a symbol for a culture's fear and concepts of immorality within that culture. So we got one monster, we're going to have a few more before this is over, okay? And of course, the last thing, hubris, excessive pride, is the greatest flaw and fault that a character could have. This is according to not just this culture, but the majority of cultures throughout the world and world history, and also pretty much every world religion emphasizes this as well. You see it right here too. Okay, now last but not least, some ways to interpret this text, book number 9, through our different lenses, the metaphors of life. First and foremost, we see the danger of being led astray with the abdication of responsibility, which brings a meaningless and unfulfilled life. Okay, we see that in the Lotus Eaters, right? Their life is meaningless. There is no true fulfillment there. And that's kind of the trade-off that you usually get. We see this in The Lion King too, right? If you are so terrified of responsibility and so crippled with cowardice over what life is going to throw at you and what you could get from life, that you choose, instead of bearing that responsibility, you choose to get rid of it. You choose to just kind of say, no, I don't want that anymore. Well, the plus side of that is that you don't have it anymore, right? You get to live with some sort of sensual pleasure like the lotus plants. But the problem is you have a deeper level of suffering in you now, which is nihilism, which is despair, depression, everything feels meaningless now. Whereas if you do the flip thing, if you take on the responsibility now, then you're going to suffer. You're going to have the pain of that meaning and that kind of possibly crippling, responsibility on yourself, but you're going to have meaning. You're going to have a lot of sensation of meaning and fulfillment, like we see with Odysseus. He is going to suffer a lot, but he really does get more fulfillment than pretty much anyone in the story. So great points that Homer is illustrating here. And then we have, continuing with that idea of the metaphor for life, the danger of being involved with immoral behavior and people, okay, like the Lotus Eaters, like the Cyclops. There's also the need here for right action is being more important, essentially, than just religious piousness, right? You can't just fall back on like treating God and religion like it's a slot machine. That's not really what we're looking for if you're a religious person. You need to actually embody and act out the religious life, which means being a good person. That's really what we're looking for here, okay? And then finally, of course, like we said at the end here, your actions will carry their own punishment. You don't need God or your dad or your parents or your principal, your teachers, your coach to be the one to punish you all the time. Sometimes your actions will carry, like in your journey towards that goal in life, towards that goal of happiness and fulfillment in life, that will sometimes be its own punishment. You're struggling to get there, or you're kind of now your hindrance in getting there because of your immoral actions. Okay. What is Homer trying to teach here? Lastly, before we end, first, I think he is emphasizing moral responsibility to family and the duty and relationships to uh, the duty and relationships that you have to your family, okay, and those around you. That's very clear. I think he's really emphasizing that once again here. He also points out, I think, the focus on monstrous behavior uh, and how in his culture, which is one that is very religious and very moral, has a very deep sense of cultural honor, what that monstrous behavior really looks like. And he's kind of using Polyphemus and the Lotus Eaters as a negative example, right? As an exemplar negative, right? Is to say, no, don't be like that, right? Be the opposite, essentially. And he, of course, like all Greeks, is going to warn us against hubris at the end here. Okay. So that is, in short or in long, the quick and very, long-winded summary we have of books 1, 5, and 9. We're going to do the same thing with the next 3 books and the following 3. Okay. We got 2 more of these to go. Now, in the meantime, I usually leave my students with a reflection on the Odyssey, right? Books 1 to 9 reflection. You got to choose one, just one of these things. And you need to tell me whatever you're going to tell me. You need to tell me your response to one of these 3 prompts, but you need to do it in at least 2 quotations. You need to kind of grab 2 examples from the text to show me this. So what are our options here? Number 1, in what way is Odysseus a unique and admirable hero in mythology and legend? Okay, how's he different from other ones that we know about? How's he so admirable? Why is he admirable? Why do we like him? Talked about that quite a bit. Number 2, how do we see traits and behaviors in the Odyssey that the Greeks clearly valued, clearly liked? Okay, we talked about that a bit. And then number 3, in what way does Odysseus face challenges and temptations that keep him from his responsibility and happiness? So in that journey towards his fulfillment in life, his true kind of like fulfillment in life, his goal that he's pursuing in life, what are his hindrances to it? Because there's a lot so far, right? What is it that's kind of keeping him from that? And the applicability of that question should be really clear, guys. It's gonna be we're gonna continue to hit this point: is what is therefore keeping us from really reaching fulfillment in our lives, and where do we see those things depicted here in metaphorical forms? Okay, what are these things? Yeah. Okay. Now, for the writing here, we're looking for really 2 paragraphs, right? I'm not looking for a full essay. I'm looking for more of a quick write, essentially. So 2 quotations, meaning give me a body paragraph with, of course, intro, with a thematic, not thematic, with a thesis statement, right? Answering this question in brief. And then the extended answer, the extension of your thesis should be that body paragraph, which includes 2 quotations as well. Again, integrate the quotes properly. You don't need to cite them. I'm not interested in that right now. I know where you're getting the quotes from. Get them in there, and then articulate to me in a sufficient amount of length. You can see how long this particular page is, right? We shouldn't go over this point, but try to fill up a good chunk of it for this assignment. Okay. If you have questions, of course, come and see me. And in the meantime, I will see you next time on books number, I think it's 10 through 17. All right. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.